When I started college in 1984 and I was taking Russian, there were two jobs you could have besides going to grad school. You could go into, well, I'm counting those two. One, you could go into, basically security agencies / the Foreign Service, or you could work as an interpreter on a Soviet fishing boat. That was it.
Soviet fishing boat.
Well, I don't know. I thought it sounded pretty horrible. I think it's very telling that on the one hand you have the sense that, everybody's kind of buying this notion that, Ukraine is run by Nazis and we have to protect ourselves. But if they really, really believed that, hundreds of thousands of Russian men would not be fleeing the border to get away, because I think they would be fighting to save their country. And on some level, they don't believe they'd be fighting to save their country. So there's levels of belief and commitment.
And memes.
And memes. We thank God we have memes. That's all we have left is memes.
Hello, everybody.
This is the second episode of Scholarly ZEIT GUEST, the podcast of the Harriman Institute we produce here at Columbia University. Scholarly ZEIT GUEST is your favorite podcast on contemporary ideas and trends in the Slavic field. My name is Tanya Efremova, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Harriman Institute, and this is Mark Lipovetsky, professor of Slavic languages and literatures here at Columbia University, and my wonderful co-host. And today, we are beyond excited to have with us Eliot Borenstein, professor of Russian and Slavic Studies at NYU, author of multiple books on Soviet and post-Soviet gender and sexuality, conspiracy theories, memes, and the punk energy of Pussy Riot. He is a cool vibe expert on contemporary Russian culture and is currently working on a book called Unstuck in Time on the post-Soviet uncanny, which is coming out pretty soon.
I just submitted it.
Wonderful.
Really?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Welcome, Eliot, and we're delighted to have you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Eliot, we try to begin each podcast with the same question, which is on everybody's mind. So we're all talking about the decolonization of our field, and we want to pick the mind of our ZEIT guests and ask them, and you first and foremost, so where to begin with, what to do, how do you see this process?
Well, I think it's an odd moment, right? Because some of these conversations have been happening for a while. Certainly the conversations about decolonization throughout the academy have been huge. As usual for Slavic, it arrives a bit later, but it's not as if before February 2022 people were not thinking about the overall imperial subject of Russian culture. And what I find really fascinating as I'm following these conversations, just listening to people talk through their anxiety and stress over everything that's happening, is it feels like, yes, we have to decolonize Russian and Slavic studies, but it also feels like we're panicking a little bit too much, right? As if suddenly the sky is falling, which it kind of is, and we have to decolonize as quickly as possible. And for me, I don't know, I'm not reacting that extremely to that. I'm reacting extremely to everything horrible that's going on. But I guess because I never felt particularly implicated in this notion of great Russian civilization, or I was never under the illusion that because I love the literature, I'm studying this country with a wonderful political system that would never hurt anybody. So I personally don't feel the need in my own scholarship to rethink what Russia is, because I feel like I already had a pretty sober view of it. So institutionally, yes, we need to really work on this, but then there's all these institutional problems. I remember I've had conversations with people who are saying, well, you should offer Ukrainian, you should offer Czech, all these other languages. We absolutely should. But that conversation almost seems to assume that, Russian is the obstacle. If it weren't for Russian, which everybody in the world is taking, then all these people would be taking Ukrainian and Polish and so on and so forth, when actually we can barely sustain Russian. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking outside of Russian, absolutely. But the reality in academia here in the United States is we're barely maintaining Russian.
That's unfortunately true. But you've been an administrator at NYU for so many years. And so what curriculum changes do you think are more or less urgent in the current condition?
Well, certainly, say in the culture courses, right? Those big introductory culture courses. I used to teach one called Russia Between East and West, but it was really, when I think about it, way too focused on a kind of mainstream Russian narrative. I think those courses, the ones that we're offering to the largest number of people, we need to do a better job of giving multiple perspectives beyond the perspective of the ethnic Russian, beyond the sort of imperial narrative. Beyond that, then it's a real question of expertise, right? I mean, we have to find a way to have more people in the academy who can do stuff that's not just Russian, who can do stuff even from the Russian Federation that's not just Russian. And that is a challenge, and I think the only people who are likely to do that are going to be people from that part of the world who didn't have to just learn Russian first and then pick up, Tatar. That will help, but I think the marginal position of Russian studies already makes us a bit of a challenge. I think what we need to do, particularly, is make sure that we are, we're putting on events and we are including having conversations that are not just about Russia. In terms of the curriculum, it's a big challenge. I'm not going to pretend it isn't.
Yeah, it's true, because with the languages too, you can't just offer 1 year of Ukrainian and then no second year of Ukrainian and switch into Czech. That would not be sustainable.
Yes. Yeah, so we have at NYU we have this global network, and we have a site in Prague, and so because we had a site in Prague, we used to try to offer Czech, and we'd offer Czech maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years of Czech, and we'd think, well, we have a site there, it'll get people taking the language. It didn't. We had like 3 people taking it, and that was for a language that we had a global site for, because there wasn't a group of students who had this strong interest. And that was many years ago, and my impression of our students, who are still wonderful and all of that, is that they're even more anxious about their future, about their careers, and are taking fewer risks, and are less likely to devote their huge chunk of their time to a language that most people in the United States don't know.
What do you think about the scenario that many of us have been discussing, you included, of course, that since we've already entered into the new Cold or Hot War era, and the old position of the West versus, back then it was the USSR, now it's Russia, and colleagues remember this period as the golden age of Slavic studies, not only because there were subsidies coming from above, but also because there were more jobs. There were more need in experts that would know, let's say USSR or Russia, it doesn't matter in this context, would know language, would understand culture, would be able to do the analysis. Do you think that the situation will repeat itself?
Well, I don't think it'll repeat itself entirely that way, because hopefully we're not going to get to that much of a standoff. And the irony of what you describe as this golden age is, it's true in terms of jobs it was a golden age, but I feel like in most of the fields in Slavic studies we're doing much better work than we did during the Cold War, especially in literature, anything that's not about the 19th century. But it's hard for me to imagine a moment when our government invests a lot of money in anything to do with education. So I worry that we're not going to have this Sputnik moment and this great influx of attentions. We'll not have attention. I think the best thing we could do is maybe get more people looking at us, more students wanting to take our courses. But it's really going to come down to a kind of retail level of convincing our deans that this is important, rather than convincing Congress to fund it, because I don't think Congress is going to fund it anyway.
No, the Congress will not fund Slavic studies, but it may fund security agencies, sure, and new departments in security agencies, and they will create jobs, etc., etc.
That's true. That could certainly help. And the funny thing is, when I was in college during the last years of the Cold War, I didn't know it was the last years of the Cold War, but when I started college in 1984 and I was taking Russian, there were 2 jobs you could have besides going to grad school. You could go into, I'm counting those 2. One, you could go into basically security agencies / the Foreign Service, or you could work as an interpreter on a Soviet fishing boat. That was it.
Soviet fishing boat.
Well, I don't know. I thought it sounded pretty horrible. So even though it was a golden age, there were some very narrow paths. Now we have more paths, but with fewer opportunities in them. So yeah, I think we could benefit from government wanting more area knowledge for certain things, but that won't be the result of anything good.
Yeah, that's for sure.
This whole idea of government really, putting the funds into seeking instruction on how best to dismantle Russia really seems to be a conspiracy theory realized in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, because you worked so much on conspiracy theories, whether you see this whole idea of what we thought would be a conspiracy theory suddenly becoming official ideology, at least in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this is really what's happening in conspiracy theory becoming ideology, or you think it's probably something else?
Well, I think
fueled by something else.
Sure. Well, I think some of the stuff that fuels conspiracy theory has been behind a lot of Russian rhetoric and policy for the past several years, particularly the idea that I wouldn't call it necessarily a conspiracy theory itself, but the basis for so many conspiracy theories, which is that everybody's out to get Russia, and they want to destroy Russia, and they want to tear Russia apart, just like the Soviet Union was taken apart. What is so ironic about this is, if anyone stopped and thought for a moment, the last thing the United States needs is for Russia to fall apart into multiple countries with different nuclear weapons and different leaders and all of that. Most of the world is invested in a certain type of stability. Regime change is another matter, but it's like so many of these anxieties that are represented in Russian conspiracy theories and this notion of Russophobia and everybody hating us. They're projections of something very internal, right? It's not. I don't think it's that most of the world wants Russia to fall apart. It's that Russia's afraid it's going to fall apart, and the only reason Russia will fall apart is if Russia does things that makes it fall apart. And so, in fact, yes, as of February, I'd say Russia's much closer to falling apart than it ever was, but not because of anything the West is doing. It's because of what Putin is doing. It's ironic. That doesn't help,
Right.
but it is painfully ironic.
What I thought was really interesting about conspiracy theories generally is that they work, and mostly I think work because they're not necessarily disseminated through official media, right? But right now, I think what's happening in Russia is that this specific vision of a conspiracy theory, that the West are interested in dismantling Russia completely and absolutely, are being projected through official media. Do you think this kind of has any effect on how much of it works? Why or why not?
Mm-hmm. No, it's an interesting question, right? Because when a conspiracy theory becomes simply part of what the state is saying, you can just simply call it propaganda, but in the American sense, not in the Russian sense. But what's happening with conspiracy theory, what's been happening for decades now, is this feedback loop, right? Like almost everything that Putin's been saying is stuff that that has been circulating in the media for years, parent number one, parent number two, all this stuff, and usually not initially produced by the state, right? But someone opportunistically finds it, adopts it, tries it out. There are so many things that don't become part of the overall conspiracy theory that is being pushed at any given moment, but it's just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And the overall sense that that the West hates us, that works really, really well for so many reasons, right? I mean, there's so much disappointment in the West, so that like so much in state propaganda, and I think one of the reasons that it works so much better than Soviet propaganda is they're really trying to convince people of things they already kind of believe. So that is still probably going to work. But there's the question of what working means, because I think it's very telling that on the one hand you have the sense that, yeah, everybody's kind of buying this notion that, you know, Ukraine is run by Nazis and we have to protect ourselves. But if they really, really believed that, hundreds of thousands of Russian men would not be fleeing the border to get away, because I think they would be fighting to save their country. And on some level, they don't believe they'd be fighting to save their country. So there's levels of belief and commitment, and where this stops working is when it's asking a great deal of commitment from people who aren't ready to give it. So on one level they believe it, but not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating dynamic that you reveal, and as you just said, what we perceive now as official propaganda is in fact the extraction of popular fears, desires, anxieties, cultural production, right? So basically, we are seeing here how culture produces politics. Based on this idea, do you think that in the same way, in a similar way, culture can produce the response to this mass insanity that now had reached the official level? And here we mean your work on memes.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that memes can be one of the, I don't know, units in this resistance movement that the culture can offer now?
I think internet memes are really useful as forms of resistance, but their use is limited. I think they're kind of there's signs of people in a community who want to be in a community of like-minded people. They say, I sent this to you, you got it, I got it, we're kind of the same. It lets you know you're not alone. It lets you be in this position where you're laughing at what is happening. Where I wonder, though, is the possibility of that translating into action. And sadly, it's just like everything else about our culture on the internet. All of this, it seems that the enjoyment of sharing this information and snark on the internet takes the place of action, rather than having to actually turn to action. And given the huge restrictions on cultural expression that we've seen in the past couple of years, but in the past 6 months, it's hard to imagine a situation where, and I have very little imagination for this stuff, so that might be the problem, but it's hard for me to imagine a situation where, based on where we are now, there's going to be enough room in the culture for people to publicly express how outraged they are without either being put in prison and therefore it stops, or it getting to such a point where basically you have a revolt. And that also seems unlikely because, if these, and this, I'm not saying this as a criticism because I'm not in this situation, but if these hundreds of thousands of men who have fled to Georgia and elsewhere not to fight in the war had stayed, right, and gone into the streets, we would see something different. But the other part of it is a very reflexive disgust towards anything like a revolution that seems to unite people across the political spectrum, which then leaves you, I don't know where. I don't know. I think the only way out of this is some kind of palace coup.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not like I think we're actually expecting people sharing memes to come out and create a new revolution for us, but there were instances of specific cases when when something that looks like a very mimetic structure actually allowed to both express resistance and kind of create change, at least in a specific situation. I'm talking about this meme with the Vobla.
The Vobla is great, yes.
The Vobla thing. So basically what happened was, I think it became a meme offline first, and then kind of was capitalized on by the viral structures of the web. But originally, it was a lawsuit against a woman in Tyumen, right, who wrote somewhere in the street, "Нет войне," no to war, and covered some of the letters with asterisks, and then made a claim in court that what she meant was actually no to Vobla, which is a kind of fish.
Vobla is a Caspian roach. I looked it up.
Oh my God!
And that term suggests
I didn't know that.
Caspian roach, and it's such a terrible term. It suggests to me that we're never eating it in the States because who wants to eat a roach? I don't know why it's called a roach, but if they don't change the name, it's never going to be big here. But Vobla is a fish that people eat. People see in Russia, and it's so. This is a great wordplay thing, of course, and then it turned into this wonderful song.
Yes, there was a song, and there were memes that came out of it.
It's great. It's wonderful, and I'm particularly amazed that she was able to get out of court with that explanation. That I'm sorry, I just really don't like Vobla.
So it is a kind of a cultural form of protest that also managed to kind of be useful once in a while already.
But is it useful?
Of course.
For her.
For her.
For her. No, I don't think it's only for her. Continuing my question, so basically it works in the same way as conspiracy theory work, right? It's building the base, it's building the supporting group, sort of.
But also hearing from the court that this is also something that goes is already a signal. I don't know. There are people who are maybe not joining this ship of the absurd, but still are sensitive.
Even from the level of power, right?
Right.
Because obviously the judge knew what
she meant.
What she meant, right? But he preferred to sort of to believe, to accept the explanation that were provided by her defense. So it's of course these games would remind us all about the 1970s late Soviet period where everybody understands what is meant but pretends not to understand and sort of secretly collaborate. But then again, it is exactly the cultural resistance that eventually ended with 1991. Certainly these things do not work fast, but I think that you prove that they do work. in the bad way, right? But
Right.
they also can work in the good way.
I guess. I mean, I think part of it was I've been burnt before, right? In 2011, 2012, I really was optimistic for the first time in a long time, and I was mistaken. And so it's great. I feel good seeing these memes. I feel reassured that there are sane people out there, and I'm sure people who are sharing them are feeling the same thing. But I'm not optimistic that it means much in terms of a base, because the regime has shown it is willing to be violent, it is willing to put people in prison, and if it's going to be a matter of popular resistance, until people are actually, and some are obviously, but until in large numbers people are willing to go out there and confront the police, this is easy for me to say, right? I'm not sure I could do it, right? But in the absence of that, another way of looking at it is this is kind of a safety valve, right? Okay, we'll let people talk about their VOBLA, and we're going to continue our war.
It's almost Bakhtinian then.
Yeah. If Bakhtin talked about VOBLA. He must have used the word
It's a little
VOBLA
bit
somewhere.
carnival, huh?
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yes, VOBLA in the work of Bakhtin. We have to. That's the next conference.
As you probably know, Evgeny Dobrenko and Natalia Johnson's Cradle in their recent book, The State Laughter, they argue that Bakhtin is deadly wrong, and that the Soviet laughter had nothing to do with the carnival, that it was, first of all, not funny, and second of all, it was a form of political repression. So not every laughter can be a form of resistance.
Yeah.
This one is.
This one is, absolutely is. But I just don't know what it ends up leading to. I would love for it to lead to something, but I don't see where. I don't see the room.
I think that of course, first of all, we see lots of grief and anger and criticism in the social media, in the form of poetry and in the form of chronicles and photographs, etc. And that's one thing, and that's building up. On the other hand, exactly the sphere of humor, the sphere of satire, it's growing. It's becoming more angry and more biting, and maybe that will lead to the situation when the authorities that are fearful now, of course, that produce terror and produce absurd in the form of terror, right? That when they will be laughable, and that's yes. Something that they are sort of making very, very possible by each of their moves, and hopefully a laughable dictator loses power. Let's sort of invest into this belief.
And certainly Putin never liked being laughed at. We know that from the very beginning with Kukly, with the show that was canceled because of his puppet. But I think the smartest thing that the regime is doing is letting people go. Because so many people have left, like everybody I know has left, right? And then even more people have left because of the mobilization. It's terrible for the future, terrible for the economy, but it's a much more dangerous mix when you keep everybody who's resisting there and saying you can't go. So the leaders, the biggest opposition people, they left, and I understand why, and I would have left too, but then who's left there?
Definitely. I mean, one thing is the leaders of the opposition and activists, but also I think what we see happening right now is a lot of cultural producers who used to be somewhere in the gray zone in the past 20 years or so, both appearing on Channel 1 and on the Russian YouTube, at this point are kind of facing the fact there is no gray zone available anymore. And I have a question about contemporary Russian pop culture in that context, because it was largely produced by these cultural producers. So what is the future of Russian pop culture? Do you think there can be any sustained interest in Russian pop culture in the West long term? Because what we see right now is actually quite a bit of movement with our major bands having tours. Like there was a tour by Pussy Riot, I Speak was performing in Brooklyn, and then Noise MC is coming soon. So it seems like there's a lot of, at this point, still opportunity for the Russian cultural producers and Russian popular culture to find audience here in the West. Do you think it will be long term? And the second part of this question is also whether you think any kind of popular culture can be produced within Russia, and from the point of view of like the ideology that's now is interested in shaping something that looks like popular culture. But unfortunately, so far, the only example that comes to mind here is the song by Shulman. I think that's the only product.
Yeah. So great questions. I think actually there's a great future for Russian popular culture abroad. That we are in this incredible diasporic moment, that there are enough Russian speakers around the world now to sustain a popular culture that is largely internet-based, but then also with tours and stuff like that. So Russian mass culture, Russian popular culture, and Russian interesting popular culture is really going to continue. The best of it will continue. It's just not going to be oriented towards people in Russia. So I was on the IMATS show yesterday, right? And I was looking before I went on. I was looking at the numbers of views that she had, and before February, she had lots of views, right? But she has 5 times as many views for pretty much every episode now than she did before February, right? Because this is where the attention is going. So there's plenty of, I don't know how to monetize it, but there's plenty of room for that. Look, Masyanya is produced in Israel, right? So that will continue. Within Russia, it's the problem there is, like, again, every example, like I'm writing a book about Harry Potter in Russia right now, and every example I can come up with that is like trying to be, Pravoslav, the Russian Orthodox patriotic, it's horrible. It is so bad, and it's bad because it's trying to do what it thinks the Western stuff is doing, which is indoctrinate, and so it's trying to indoctrinate. It's usually terrible. So there's going to be stuff that's produced for this, I think, increasingly narrow segment of the population whose tastes are basically retro-Soviet, but none of that's going to travel abroad very well, and I don't think it's going to be a real flourishing of mass culture there. I think it's going to be pretty grim.
Do you think it will be actually popular within Russia?
Well, I don't think we'll be able to assess how popular it is because it's just going to be everywhere. It's going to be on those songs are going to be played. It's going to be on television. There's going to be you're going to have this hyper real effect of it being popular, and who knows, right? And maybe for enough people it will. But it's we're back again to that situation where we can't really gauge the connection, the statistics, right, about popularity and consumption, and all of that. So yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it might end up being tuned out. But that probably won't stop it from being produced.
But look, there is some strange distinction, and we can see it in this country as well, right? We are the last generation that watches TV, and I can't even say that I am listening to radio. It's something very, very archaic. Only when you are in the car, but even there, we prefer to use our Spotify, right? So it's very generation divided, right? And the internet is indeed the media. I'm sorry, for the generation of younger people. Yeah. Increasingly young, right? So that's what matters, in fact, right?
Yeah.
And all right, they blocked Facebook. Of course, we can imagine that this will be blocked, but for every block there is a VPN. Yes. So it will be the game of political and technological devices and agilities, right? So I think that eventually in the last count, the popularity on internet or just on YouTube is what matters.
Yeah, that's actually amazing. YouTube is still it amazes me they haven't blocked YouTube.
They're asking, the deputies are asking to block.
Well, yeah, I think it's inevitable. But what you touched on with the VPN is interesting because it made me rethink the whole VPN thing, because, of course, one of the frustrations so many have with Russian news media consumption is that people could get their news from other sources. They just don't bother to, even without getting a VPN. But I think where the hope is, and I hadn't thought of this before you said this, Mark, is with the younger generation of people getting VPNs not because they're looking for news, but because they're looking for better music and stuff like that.
Or games,
right? Yeah. Games, of course, games. But because they're on the VPN, they might find other stuff. That is a bit of a hopeful note to me, because the people who are getting a VPN to get the news are we already know who they are, right? They're us. They're the us who are there, right? So it doesn't really end up spreading beyond the particular silos. But yes, in fact, the more they increase restrictions on culture production, the more likely they're to drive people to sources where they're going to find news that they don't want to see.
Yeah.
I have a question about what you've been talking about with all of the views on YouTube channels and things like that. It seems like now that major independent news channels have been blocked, or they are unavailable in Russia, or they have shut down because of censorship pressure, a lot of our focus has been shifted to our personal YouTube channels, and the Russian YouTube indeed has this moment. And there is a special kind of, I think, emerging new kind of a celebrity, of a YouTube celebrity, that's either a popular interviewer like Ekaterina Gardeyeva or Yuri Dudь, or an expert star like Ekaterina Shulman.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what's happening with this kind of celebrity is that there's already kind of like a pop culture fandom moment happening, especially in case with Ekaterina Shulman. We can see it so well because she's now a character of some songs, she's a character of memes, there's like merchandise with Ekaterina Shulman, she's all over the place.
Sort of like Rachel Maddow, right?
Very much.
But in a good way.
In a good way.
So yeah, my question is whether you think something new, like a new genre or a new format, can come out of this specific moment and this kind of like desire to get information through YouTube channels, and whether like new political and cultural commentary can emerge out of this new form.
That's an excellent question. I've been thinking about it because the examples you give, these are wonderful channels, and but most of them, I think, or almost everybody you mentioned, became famous outside of YouTube first. I mean, Dud's
actually.
Dud's is kind of
Mainly
YouTube.
mainly YouTube. Mainly
He
YouTube.
was a journalist, but he became
Right.
really viral.
Yeah. So, but he had some sort of credibility before he became. I mean, he was a professional before he went on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're all a professional.
Yeah. But Dude is different from the others who, we know them because they were on TV. They were in the legacy media, and now they have moved to YouTube. And what I'm wondering, and I haven't followed enough, is that situation sounds different from the YouTube celebrity situation we have in the West, where most of the YouTube celebrities are native YouTube celebrities, right? They are YouTube phenomena. They're influencers. It's monetized in a particular way, but also people like Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro. So I don't know if we're seeing so many of those happening yet on Russian YouTube, but presumably they will, and those should end up looking a bit different, right? Because some of the people like Shulman, they still behave like people from legacy media. That's not a criticism, but and in fact, it makes it kind of for older people like me, it makes it kind of nice. But Dudes is a bit different, right? Dudes is much more laid back and more internet-like. So I think we probably will see more of that, but I don't know who it's going to be. I mean, I've seen plenty of people with their YouTube channels for like the stuff that I follow, but I don't see them as necessarily becoming, big political influencers. But that should happen.
I think Ekaterina Shulman, in that respect, is somebody who's probably closer to like politics than any other venue.
Right.
And yeah.
But there is a character who made his entire political career on YouTube. His name is Alexei Navalny.
That's true. That is quite true. That is absolutely true.
And this is why he's in prison.
Yes. Of course. How could I forget? I mean, he was the one who really understood how to use that so brilliantly, right? And look where he is. But still, he is an amazing success through YouTube. It's true.
So YouTube is still, and probably it's not yet used to its full capacity.
Right. But think of the format of Navalny's shows, right? Navalny often would sit like he's a dictator, right? Like he's on his news show.
Yeah.
He's at the table, and there's a screen behind him. It's sort of like it's reassuring people who aren't that internet. Like it's okay. It's almost like television. You can watch it. It won't hurt you.
Yeah. So a lot of cultural critics are talking about why this catastrophe has happened, right? And one of the reasons that periodically pops up in the discussion is that we have been too much invested in the elitist culture. What we thought were progressive ideas were shared by a small fraction of readership, viewership, etc., etc. We completely gave up the popular culture about which Tanya was just asking, and that's why, by and large, it had been conquered and dominated by conservative ideas. Again, you were the first to write about that, right, in your Vakil book. And logically, so first of all, we need to look at those rare cases that cross this bridge between elitist and popular culture, elitist liberalism and popular nationalism, jingoism, chauvinism, etc. And on the other hand, we need to rethink the concept of popular culture, how to make it at the same time interesting and accessible for more than the circle of our friends.
I think it's a mistake to think of popular culture or mass culture as one thing, and what you described as people not paying attention to all this other stuff, it's not just in Russia, right? I mean, it is really amazing to me how in the United States there's been this parallel, since the 70s, or definitely the 80s, there's been this parallel world of evangelical literature, for instance, Christian fiction, Christian film, all this stuff that is very, very, mostly very hard right-wing, that is invisible. It was invisible to most of us until we couldn't ignore it anymore. But it was making a difference. It was making a huge difference. But it's sort of like, you know, if you're a man going to a clothing store, you just sort of walk by the women's clothing section without thinking what's there. We were all walking by the Christian bookstores and not seeing it. So there's the same sort of surprise that a lot of American liberals have of, wow, this is what people think, right? You know, people like Trump, people like all this stuff. It should have been easier to see with Russia, but I think it's still a newer thing in Russia. It's really, really, for an audience that I can't relate to. It's a very militarized and very just awful. The military stuff you're talking about, I think, is particularly fascinating because, yes, it is totally intensified, but the militarization of culture is one of the few things that I think has remained from Soviet times through the 90s, post-Soviet to now. And that's one of the reasons why I find reading these novels so awful, that still one of the main paradigms for men's entertainment culture is military, because it's a common experience. There weren't that many other genres. There were no other real adventure genres available in Soviet times. It was just military. And all of the rhetoric, it always starts with the military. Like back when I was looking into the Dima Yakovlev's law, the law against foreign adoptions, one of the arguments that comes up again and again is, what if these children are adopted in a foreign country and then they end up joining the army and fighting us? Which was fascinating to me because no one in other countries, no one would ever think of that, right? Like, also, how likely is it that there's really going to be a soldier-to-soldier conflict? Is not going to happen. But even to go that far, it's like, wow, that's like number 100 on my list of reasons why you might want to have a foreign adoption. But it comes up again and again. It's really amazing and I find disturbing.
Of course.
Yeah, that's not a very optimistic note to end on.
Well, I give no optimistic notes. I only have the pessimistic ones.
But
And memes. We have memes.
We have
have
thank
memes.
God we have memes. That's all we have left is memes.
That's the source of the optimism.
Yes, exactly.
It was
Thank
a
you.
wonderful discussion.
Well, thank you. It was really nice talking with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, and thanks, Eliot.
Thanks. Thank you both.